The general election betting scandal continues, but does it really matter to voters? Is this the non-policy election where parties are just bumbling along? And find out what former First Minister Alex Salmond thinks of the SNP's chances at the ballot box. I'm John Ferguson, and joining me today is Hannah Rodger and Douglas Dickie. This is Planet Holyrood.
It's important we look at the facts.
Politics has to be about service.
A modern form of national service.
The outcome, that's for the voters to decide.
So today we've seen the betting scandal that's become one of the big stories of this general election deepen further. Scottish Secretary Alistair Jack has admitted that he placed 3 bets on the date of the general election. We've now also had Scottish Liberal Democrat leader Alex Hamilton come out and say that he placed bets on whether some of his colleagues would win or lose their seats. What do you make of this, Douglas?
Yeah, John, I'm struggling really hard to care about this. If I'm being honest, I don't really see the big deal with it. I like a flutter myself, so quite frankly, it's quite nice to see the bookies getting a down for a change rather than them just taking my money all the time. It's nice to see politicians taking someone else's money rather than the taxpayers. So I'm kind of.
But they're stealing it.
Yeah, from Well, are they stealing it? Are they stealing it?
Well, they are stealing it. This is sorry, I've just totally butted in here, but I have mixed feelings about it. I think the people who have bet on the date of the election, knowing when it was going to be, I think that's completely hideous and wrong, and I don't care about whose money it is. But I would say that that's theft. They're stealing money. But the people like Alistair Jack and Alex Hamilton, I think it's just getting silly now. And all these calls for, politicians should not be allowed to bet on any politics. I just think that's ridiculous. Why?
Yeah, we need to draw a line, don't we, between what is clearly highly inappropriate behaviour. If a bunch of politicians
illegal.
had insider knowledge of the date of the election and they've then bet on that, that's clearly wrong. But politicians placing bets on other things that's just gambling, isn't it?
I just think the bookie doesn't like it when the tables are turned. I mean, bookies prey on the vulnerable. These kind of betting app adverts you see during the football that are obviously, they're aimed at young males predominantly, and they prey on addiction. And I for one, I just can't get too angry. And let's say, don't get me wrong, I've got a betting app on my phone, right? So I'm certainly not saying that gambling's wrong. I've got an absolutely horrific record, but I do enjoy when I'm watching the football or the golf more often. I'll maybe stick a few quid on. But I just can't get angry about it. If bookies are offering you odds or someone on something, then people have got a right to, put a bet on it.
How could you say that if it's the people who clearly have knowledge of, the people who clearly knew when the general election was going to be, and then they bet on it? How can you be okay with that? That's just committing a crime.
It's just like getting a tip for the old guy in the pub. It's just like...
No, it isn't. It's not the same.
No, I know. I'm being a bit...
Anna, do you think that there's a difference between the... some of the original stories on this, senior Conservative politicians and party workers who were, placing bets right up until the moments before the election was actually called, and who clearly appeared to know what the date was going to be? They seem to be sort of, there's very few excuses open to them. Alistair Jack's, it's a little bit different, isn't it? It seems to be a number of months that have passed between him placing the bets and the election date being announced. It would appear the election date wasn't actually set when he
Yeah.
placed the bets. Do you think he's got a get out of jail free card here?
Well, not just a get out of jail free card. Like, for once, I'm going to stick up for Alistair Jack and say that he should never have been put in jail in the first place. I just think that, like, I saw the story last night and I thought, okay, this is interesting. But when you actually read, because it was the BBC story, and to be honest, I thought the BBC, you know, is usually pretty kind of tame when it comes to these things, and also, you know, is very sort of sound in terms of its sourcing. And I just thought, actually, the story is really poorly written. It was very unclear as to where, you know, where he'd made these claims that he'd placed these bets. It was just bizarre. And then I was actually speaking to some of my Tory contacts last night who, you know, then highlighted this updated statement. And, you know, basically it says, this is from Alistair Jack, I placed 2 unsuccessful bets on the date of the general election and 1 successful one. I put 2 bets on in March of £5 each for an election to be held in May and June respectively. In April, I put £20 at 5-1 on election being held between July and September. Like, you know, so if I think it's mishandling of it. If Alistair Jack had said that when he got the initial inquiry, I don't think there would have been a story.
I mean, it
But
does
it's the
seem
fact
odd.
that he kind of maybe he wasn't just completely clear straight away, then it was a story, and then he had to deny it, which was stupid. But, you know, I still stand by, I don't believe he should have been in jail in the first place. And now you've got Alex Cole-Hamilton, who, to be quite honest, I think it looks as if he's just trying to insert himself into something to be relevant.
Yeah,
Because
with
he's
Alistair
not
Jack,
even an MP.
Alistair Jack he's a member of the government. He's in the cabinet. You would think that if you were in
There's
the
no
cabinet, you would
chance
just
in
avoid
hell.
putting bets on the date of a general election that government is going to be setting. And there is also question marks over, you know, even for the Conservatives' grasp of sort of figures when it comes to money. To have told a BBC journalist that he made was over £2,000, and then he's rounded that down to just over £100. It does feel like he's still got some explaining to do.
Well, does it though? I mean, you know, he says he was making a joke. It's not a very funny joke, but it's also not very. I mean, I don't know. Like, is this like a bloke thing that people are impressed by how much people make betting? Like, I don't know why you would even say that if it wasn't true. Why would you make out as if you had won a huge amount of money when you hadn't? Like, I don't know what he would be trying to achieve by claiming that he'd made £2,000. I mean, is it a men thing? Do men find that impressive? I don't know.
Well, I mean,
I find it pretty
exactly.
depressing.
These are the questions that need to be answered.
I mean, I find it
But do
depressing.
they?
when I win at the bookies, to be honest, I find it depressing when other people win at the bookies, but I find it impressive when I win at the bookies. But I mean, I've got to say as well, if someone in inside knowledge at the date of the election, I think they'd be putting a lot more than 20 quid on it as well. So I think we can safely say
There's
that.
no chance in hell that he knew. And Rishi Sunak didn't even know in April or March.
I was being a bit facetious earlier. Obviously, you know, insider knowledge is illegal, and if you do it, then, you know, at the end of the day, you are leaving yourself open to, you know, potential criminal proceedings. Whether it should be, you know, that's maybe where I'm a bit different. But Alistair Jack and Alex Cole-Hamilton, indeed, if he did put anything wrong, I think he's just trying to make himself interesting. Alex Cole-Hamilton, like,
No, that's what I mean, because there's no way he's not even an MP. So what reason is he announced that he put these bets on? There was no need for him to announce that.
I mean, I think in a sense the discussion we're having now kind of leads us into the next thing that we're going to talk about, which is this the general election in the UK where, like, real policy, a discussion of the things that really affects people's lives, like education, health, the economy, where all that stuff really has gone out the window. We've got two parties, the Conservatives and the Tories, who the differences in what they're saying that they would do in government are really quite slight. They're terrified to outline any real spending plans because of the impact that would have on the opportunity for the other to criticise their tax rises that are going to have to pay for it. In the place of that, we've had the betting scandal, which is great to talk about, but who really is going to care after we've had the outcome of the general election. We've had in Scotland the Stampgate story, which has again been great fun, but how much is it going to really mean for voters in the future? We've had Rishi Sunak missing the D-Day celebrations. They're all great stories, but where is the discussion of the things that really matter to people? Is this the worst election that we've ever seen in the UK for just throwing out the real policy substance?
I noticed, John, that you said the two main parties earlier were the Conservatives and the Tories. I don't know if that was a wee Freudian slip about Labour's apparent position or position the SNP obviously think they've got. But I mean, I think you're absolutely right. Labour, I think, have been completely paranoid to say anything even remotely controversial because they've got such a big lead. They just want to get it over the line. Keir Starmer would give his right leg to just go to sleep tonight and wake up on the morning of July the 5th, I think, and nothing else has gone wrong. You had the SNP manifesto, which had almost as many blank pages as it had pages with writing in it. People are completely bereft of ideas. I think it's very much an election where we'll find out, what parties' plans are actually after it happened. It's a bit like learning to drive. I always remember when I was learning to drive, my instructor said, all I'm doing is teaching you how to pass the test. You'll learn to drive once you've passed the test. And it's a bit like that. All that matters is getting to election day and trying to win the election. And then you can actually say, right, this is what we're going to do over the next 5 years or so.
I think it should be a bit more than that, shouldn't it, Hannah? Because you're trying to win an election by telling people what you're going to do. So you do owe it to people to properly explain what they're going to get for the next 5 years.
Well, yeah, of course. They have 100%. There needs to be, more policies, more interrogation of those policies, more, straight answers, quite frankly, from the politicians, instead of trying to say, well, on one hand this, on the other hand this, we can't possibly predict everything. But then the other thing that I find very strange about this election is not only is there a lack of policies, but there's also this conflation, particularly in Scotland, of policies that are nothing to do with Westminster, but they're being applied to this election. So, we've seen it with the SNP talking about health. You're seeing it with the Tories talking about policing and justice. These are devolved issues. These are not issues that lie with Westminster when it comes to Scotland. So why are the parties kind of trying to insert that into their campaigns? And I don't know, clearly it's some sort of strategy, but I don't know what you guys think as to the reason, why they're doing that. Is it deliberately to confuse people, or
it's almost a phony war ahead of 2026. We're only 18 years out from less than 2 years out from a Holyrood election, and so much in Scotland is devolved now that in some ways, in terms of your everyday life, the Holyrood election probably has a bigger impact. I also wonder the kind of lack of policy ideas. Is this another step towards a kind of Americanization of our politics? It's almost a presidential, it's become almost presidential in its nature. Where we've seen it. ITV and BBC have had these kind of leaders' debates just between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer, because they're the only two people that can be, prime minister. So I don't know if it's a step towards that as well. But personality now is so much more important in politics.
Yeah,
I guess
and
one of the other things that they might be trying, the reasons that the parties don't really want to talk about the substance is, the Institute for Fiscal Studies report last week that basically concluded that whether it's Labour or the Conservatives that win, the reality is going to be that they're going to need to find more money from taxes, and that money is probably going to get eaten up just to keep things the way they are, never mind make things better. The financial outlook for the country is just not great, but that's not a particularly great electioneering platform to go to the public on.
no.
So earlier today, we had a chat with Alex Salmond, the former First Minister and leader of the Alba party, who launched their manifesto today. So we're going to have a listen to what Alex had to say now. Alex, we'll just get right into this. You're launching your manifesto today. You've already built one political party up from scratch into an election-winning force. It did take you 17 years that time round. Can you do it again?
Well, I'm delighted to be in Planet Holyrood from the Yes City of Dundee, where we've just launched the Alba Manifesto. You're right, it took 17 years to transform the SNP from the also-rans of Scottish politics with 2 or 3 MPs to win the Scottish elections in 2007. So I'm working on exactly the same strategy, but a slightly shorter timescale, if I may. Learning all the lessons I learned back in the 1990s and putting them into good effect, and everything's much quicker now. So we'll see if we can do it in 17 months instead of 17 years.
And I think you've spoken before about the fact that you want Alba to work with the SNP. You want a coalition for independence in the Scottish Parliament. That obviously requires the SNP to also do as well as possible in this election. How many seats do you think that the SNP can conceivably get? I'd imagine for Alba, really, the target is the Scottish election in 2026. In this general election, John Swinney's said that he would consider a good result to win half of the seats. Do you think they can do that? And if not, how bad could this potentially be for the SNP?
I think the SNP are in for a difficult time. And the reason for that is obvious if you look at the steady average of the opinion polls. There's 50% of people believe in independence, but only just over 30% are now prepared to vote for the SNP. Back in 2011, I had 45% of folk voting SNP when only 30% of people believed in independence. So it's now exactly reversed. And in that 20%, let's call it the missing 20%, where are these people? Well, these are people who are disillusioned, disaffected by the lack of progress to independence, sometimes put off by some of the stupid things the SNP have done in government recently. And these are people who are going to sit in their hands, or worse still, from a nationalist perspective, vote for Labour. So Alba's campaign is not to split the independence vote from the SNP, it's to drive at that 20% of people who are demoralised and say, look, don't stay at home, come and vote for Alba. We've got a plan to get us to independence, and don't vote for the Unionist Party, vote for a real independence party. So we're trying to mobilise the independence vote. But in that demoralisation of the vote, that's, opinion polls tell you how people are thinking about voting. But actually going out to vote is a different thing. And I think the SNP might suffer from people staying at home. That's, if they do, then that's their own fault. However, I dare say the SNP will win more seats than like 30 years ago, when any victory in any seat was regarded as a triumph. So, look, if people say, what do you want to do, right? I say to people, you vote for the most independent supporting candidate in any constituency. And the constituencies where Alba is standing, that'll be Alba. In the constituencies where there's no Alba candidate, it will often be an SNP person. That's what I say for people to do, because I'd rather have an independent supporting candidate elected, even one who was rather insipid about getting there, than to have a unionist party elected, which I think is a counsel of despair for Scotland.
So do you think it could we be talking single figures of seats or less than 15, 20?
Well, I think 20 is a sort of kind of trigger point, isn't it? I mean, if the SNP go below 20, then that will be regarded as a major disaster, a major step backwards. And I'm just intent on making sure that it doesn't take Scotland with them. The people say there's a different perspective opening up for the election in 2 years' time, where of course we have the benefit in Scotland of the proportional system, and particularly the list vote, which is basically the more the merrier. And our target, our very explicit target now for Alba is to get 15% of the vote in that list vote, which I think is well within our compass. And that'll give us 24 MSPs in the Scots Parliament. And that might well be what makes the nationalist majority in that Parliament. And if it's the case, then it'll be part of a nationalist government. The difference will be you'll have some adults in the room and some people who've got a plan to get us to independence, which will be a novel feature compared to the last few years.
And if that major disaster does happen for the SNP, you have to think that could lead to a change of leadership in the SNP quite quickly. You want to work with the SNP. You want a coalition for independence. It's quite well documented that there is a group, I think you've called them an old guard within the SNP, who have a lot of animosity towards you personally. Now, I think there's also a lot of people within the SNP parliamentary groups who don't, and there's an even larger proportion of the SNP membership who don't. If there is a change of leadership, who would you like to see coming in to lead the party?
Yeah, I mean, I think your question says it very fairly. I mean, I suppose there's too much water under the bridge with some of the old guard in the SNP, which is a pity because, people should learn that the cause of Scottish independence is much more important than any individual animosity. There's also the question, I mean, I've got a lot more reason to dislike some people in the SNP than they've ever had for disliking me, incidentally. A lot more reason. But you should be prepared to put that to one side in the cause of Scottish independence. And luckily, the new people emerging in the SNP are off that mind. So, I mean, if that's what happens to the SNP, then I do think there'll be, look, arithmetic will dictate this. The people will dictate it. If Alba go in with 24 seats, we'll be part of an independence government.
You mentioned that you think that the new blood coming up through the party has a lot of potential. Two names that would stand out there are, of course, Kate Forbes and Stephen Flynn. Is there one of them that you would prefer to see potentially leading the SNP in the future?
Well, I don't think it's right to choose the leader of another political party. It's enough one party at a time. I mean, I think Stephen Flynn has shown himself a very capable debater in the Westminster Parliament. And Kate Forbes is a very attractive personality, which people, who don't share her views on a whole range of things, but still find that, people are interestingly a lot more broad-minded than politicians are, or journalists sometimes. The journalists, the politicians said, her views on this, that, and the next thing. The fact is a Presbyterian, true believer would disqualify her. The people don't think like that, incidentally. Not ordinary folk. They're much more tolerant of divergence of views than sometimes other politicians are. So I think she's got a big future.
In 2014, when you stepped down after the referendum, it was a rare example of a political leader resigning at a time that they really didn't need to. The party went on to have one of its most successful spells and most popular spells in its history. Do you, looking back on that and looking back in the direction the party's taken since and some of the things that have gone on, do you regret stepping down now?
Yes. Look, you never know what's in the future, John. I thought it was the right decision at the time. I thought Scotland was set fair for independence. In fact, I thought independence was as near as it could be to inevitable. And looking back over the last 10 years, for the life of me, I don't understand why opportunities like Brexit, Boris Johnson becoming Prime Minister were allowed to go begging. I mean, somebody had told me in 2014, Boris Johnson's about to become Tory Prime Minister and the country's going to Brexit against the will of Scotland. I'd have probably said, well, hang on a year or two and have the referendum then. So I think the last 10 years have been the years where the locust ate as far as Scottish independence is concerned, and therefore we have to get things back on track and do it quickly.
In terms of a path to independence now, I mean, as an observer looking on, if the SNP remain the main vehicle for independence, you would think that what has to happen now is that they're in a political cycle where they're in a downturn. You think they're going to go away for 10 years perhaps, come back under new leadership. By that time, you've got this natural majority for independence, say 50, 60%, and then perhaps there can be no argument that a generation is now past. And can that sort of timetable be speeded up? And would an incoming Labour government be a hindrance or a help to a quicker route to independence?
Well, I mean, the only prospect I can see of an independence majority in the next Scots Parliament is if Alba make the sort of breakthrough we intend to make. If Alba have about 24 seats, and let's just say, for the sake of argument, looking at current indications, which could always change, of course, but on current indications, you'd expect the SNP to go down from 64 seats to somewhere in the low 40s. Basically neck and neck with Labour in the Scottish Parliament ratings. Now that, if you add somewhere in the low 40s to Alba's 24, you have an independence majority. The most important thing in terms of getting independence was to see that's reflected in the popular vote, not just in the seats. And if you have that, then that's a powerful mandate for taking early action. And I think early action is required in independence because people are suffering really badly at the present moment. And also, I mean, the last thing we should do is allow the second bounty of the North Sea, the great new energy revolution of floating wind farms in the North Sea, which is going to be as lucrative as the oil and gas revolution of the last 50 years. The last thing we want that is in the hands of British Energy and under Westminster's tutelage. I mean, that's what happened with oil and gas. So the very last thing that Scotland should allow is another carve-up between international energy companies and Westminster government. We need to deploy these resources, perhaps 10 times Scotland's electricity requirements. We need to deploy that wealth for the benefit of the Scottish people, which is why Alba Energy, the power of Scotland, is one of the key points that the Alba Manifesto is putting forward, a way to get that wealth in public hands in Scotland and use it to the benefit of the people.
And if the independence movement can get its act together in Scottish Parliament, can Keir Starmer, assuming that he was to get in for 2 terms, can he deny a referendum for potentially 8, 9, 10 years?
No, he can't. And not if, well, let's put it this way, he could if the Scottish Parliament acts as insipidly and supinely as it's done over the last 10 years. Of course he could. But if you mobilise popular opinion and international opinion, then you can bend Westminster to the will of the people. And how do you do that? Well, you get an independence convention together, you have a referendum to show that the people back the Parliament deciding on independence, you go to the International Court of Justice, you expose Westminster as democracy deniers in the international arena. You can put incredible pressure on a Westminster government. One of the problems a number of the MSPs in Holyrood is they've never been at Westminster, they've never experienced it, they don't understand how it works, how it thinks, how the power centres there operate. But we're nothing like as helpless in the face of Westminster as many people in Scottish politics believe. You can make the weather. You don't just have to endure it in Scotland.
And just lastly, as a politician who's known to enjoy a flutter every now and then, what do you make of the betting scandal that's engulfing the Conservatives and sort of spinning off into Labour? And in particular, what do you think about Alistair Jack's conduct? Well,
who'd have thought that Alistair Jack was a punter? And who would have thought that the Conservative Party would be full of mendacious, greedy, grasping folk? In Alba, we only bet on horses. Like the £5 Trixie I put on in Mary Hill yesterday, which I'm delighted to say all three horses came up, netting £440, which, as an example to the Tory party and their greedy, grasping elements, I'm donating all the winnings to the Alba campaign fund. They should go and do likewise and think shame on themselves for the disrepute into which they brought politics yet again. And in future, bet on reliable things like horses, not politicians.
Alex Salmond, thank you very much for your readership at the Express. A lot of the things that Alex Salmond he actually cut a lot of, he froze council tax, he made university education free, a policy that's viewed as having benefited middle-class kids more than others. He made prescriptions free. He was generally seen as a pretty business-friendly politician in a way that you wouldn't class Nicola Sturgeon as, and SNP leaders that have come aside. What's your opinion on whether the SNP would be have been in a better position had he stayed on?
Well, I mean, I think it's a real sliding doors moment. I guess he is a bit of, I know he started off as kind of left-wing firebrand, but he became a bit of a tartan Tory. Certainly, in the kind of after Holyrood was created. But I just, it's so hard, it's so hard to know. I think, he was quite a man.
Was he ever really a left-wing firebrand?
I think way back at the start, was he not? Like when he was a group.
We never said he was left-wing.
Was he not a member of some left-wing group? This was before he was like on the scene. Like this was, before he was a public.
I think he sort of dragged the SNP from that very old-fashioned tartan Tory outfit towards a kind of social democratic model of politics, I guess.
A bit New Labour almost, I guess. He kind of reinvented them, but I mean, I'll be honest, I find it quite sad watching them these days. I mean, regardless of your opinion on them, and I think there are certain things that Express readers would be really agree with Alex Salmond on. The gender stuff, for example, we were kind of discussing before we came on air. It's something that they could really, get on board with his views on. But obviously, he is ultimately someone who wants to break up the UK. But regardless of your opinion on him, he's been a giant of Scottish politics. He's probably been the most preeminent figure in Scottish politics in the past 30 years. Him and maybe Sturgeon. But to see him now, I think he comes across as a bit of a crank. To be honest, no, I just think he's talking about Alba winning dozens of seats at the next Holyrood.
Do you think he could win a seat?
He could maybe, but I mean the rest of it's just fantasy land, and he talks about he's kind of putting himself up as Alba's anybody who's pro-independent should vote for Alba because only Alba have a plan to deliver independence. Yet I still don't really know what his plan is. He just seems to be shouting into a void, and he's got enough of that kind of extreme wing to give them some semblance. I mean, it's easy to forget, Alba have never won a single election of any note in Scotland. The only reason they've got any politicians is because people have defected from the SNP. Now, far be it from me to come on here and defend the SNP, but the SNP are still the preeminent pro-independence party in Scotland. I just think seeing him there, and he's got every right to stand. He's got every right to set up his own party. Alba have every right to stand in as many seats as they do. I'm glad they're standing because in these, in some of these key seats, that might be really crucial. Those few hundred votes, and it is going to be a few hundred votes could be really crucial. But it's just, I think, I don't know if he believes what he's saying. It's just nonsense.
Do you not think though, right? Alex Salmond is a master of publicity. He also he's spent his entire life in politics. I doubt he could do anything else if he wanted to, which he clearly doesn't want to. I think he literally never goes on holiday, never does anything else except from, his podcast TV thing about politics and then being a politician. So I think when obviously things went a bit skew with the SNP, he's thinking, well, how can I get back into politics? No one's going to vote for me if I'm just on my own. So I need to start a new party. But I think, it's quite interesting because see the Alba party, I'm just going to say this, right? It might be controversial, it might not be, but I think the Alba party would not get half as much coverage as they do, and people wouldn't actually know who they were if he wasn't the leader.
They wouldn't get any.
Exactly.
But I don't think they would get any, but then I guess they wouldn't have an MP and a couple of MPs and an MSP if he wasn't the leader, because he wouldn't have managed to get these people across.
Exactly. But I just mean, I think
you've got to give him that.
He is a master of PR.
Yeah. And you wouldn't want to underestimate him. He did build the SNP from nothing into an election-winning force. So who knows what might happen in 2026? I think we better bring it to an end there. We're a bit over time. Thanks to Hannah and Douglas for joining me today. You can listen to Planet Holyrood every weekday until the general election on Spotify, or watch the Daily Records YouTube channel. Thanks.
It's important we look at the facts.
Politics has to be about service.
A modern form of national service.
The outcome, that's for the voters to decide.